Thanks, Tara. Stephanie, I was interested, this is a very kind of very private activities depicted in a way in your film, like they're very kind of intimate, people letting their guard down. How did you kind of build trust with the people who you were pointing the camera at? How did you reach a point where they felt comfortable being themselves with you there with this camera apparatus?
It is profound. We are afraid of instruments that are looking at us, surveillance of ourselves or surveillance of each other. So I was aware of sensitivity to the use of equipment, and many people have known about the use of camera ever since it's been available. Is, do you have a long lens? Do you have the camera close to the body? Do you expect people to trust you, the camera operator? So when we went to the studio in the first few days, we often had more cups of tea and everyone had to go with the camera, use a participant to use it for a while. So really the first half of the day was breaking in with the camera.
I see.
I think in terms of trust, the importance about creating trust is to build a sustaining, trusting atmosphere. And so this was mentioned in the film. I'm glad it was mentioned that it was a 4-day workshop, and it was a residential facility that I rented to provide food and accommodation with the contract that all who agreed they'd like to be in the film and have the experience of being in the film wouldn't ever leave the film. So 4 solid days of being cared for, the trust was building incrementally every day as the strength or challenge of the risks of the workshops were building every day. And clearly you could imagine with a class of, I think 11 attending, something like that number, or perhaps 14, not every member, for example, of all of the workshop personnel entered into the last workshop, for example, because we all have to feel our sense of our limits and how far we want to go. And clearly, through performance rules of discipline, when you perform your props, you respect also, and so you have your own proscenium arch with your props to protect yourself from any doubt or attack. So all those structures of respect for the profession of performance came into the workshop, and then the nurturing of the people who could not leave the workshop, which I remember when I came up to Auckland, I went to 2 workshops prior to making the film. One was a Buddhist introduction to Buddhism workshop, where you had to remember to sit cross-legged for long enough and try and think or not think. Is that what you meant to do? Not think. and then I went to another workshop for 4 days where I was also at the same workshop as Maggie Eyre, and practiced opening a suitcase and imagining what it must be like to be a clown. And that was 4 days. And when you ended, I remember it's like Maggie was gutsy enough to be able to go down to Queen Street with someone immediately, like when there was an outdoor opportunity for a workshop. She was happy to go down and just sit on the footpath on Queen Street and chat away with anyone. I was nowhere near being able to go out on the street with a costume on. Mm-hmm. So, but all those lead-ups, my experience when you work on the concept of trust, where you want to go through barriers of confidence, your warm-up towards these processes just must have all that regard of respect.
It seems one of the interesting things about the film, again, as compared to the exhibition, is that upstairs it's kind of women on their own, but this is really about kind of collective joy, isn't it? Collective solidarity. Was that kind of something that you felt was kind of missing from women's lives at that time? That sort of opportunity to come together?
Well, the thing that I found after meeting you, and was invited up to AUT to the Time of the Now conference, was I suddenly realised, as no one really knew my material publicly, except for the thundering through New Zealand tour, which 2 people in this audience remember, the fact that there were conventions of one group called women was a clear indication in the history of the Western world, with rising standards of capacity with thinking and business and education with women, who were actually often bored at not being able to pass through any kind of threshold of importance or significance with their work. Clearly, the need for all women to talk more with each other was really important to get the confidence of having articulation about the debate of the time, whatever the time was. And the thing that was very important at the United Women's Convention, if anyone did go to that one in 1977, and I met the committee, it was the chair of the committee who contracted me in with $100 and a pass around of a hat to do the first film. I went to the plenary at the opening of that conference, and within the first 10 minutes, the keynote speaker asked all men of the press to leave the room. Mm-hmm. So I took that as a really important cue that if you want to encourage a group that hasn't had enough time talking with each other, you've got to give them 100% of time talking with each other. Any group, whatever the group is. And so I practiced that when I toured around the country with the first film, and therefore it was natural for me to want to see how, in a sense, the sort of embedded cultural tropes come through in a film like this with ease. You know, all the jokes for the games that Maggie thought up. School assembly. You know, animal tag. I mean, they're games that have come right through culture. So all of that reinforces the need for the collective, because otherwise you're not going to have a response, not going to have feedback. You have to be together.
Stephanie, I'd just like to speak to your point about the 1977 convention.
Yes, indeed.
Because I have two or three. My name is Sandy Hall. And
Sandy,
I have
hello.
two or three connections with the convention. I was one of the conveners.
Yes.
And the incident that you just mentioned, because I was the one that told John Bishop to get out.
Yes, Sandy. Yes, Sandy. And John Bishop was a journalist?
John Bishop was a journalist from not Radio New Zealand, but one of the other commercial stations in Christchurch.
Yes.
And we've been in touch with them at least 18 months before to say we would like it if you sent your female journalist to cover this event. And the fact that John Bishop arrived in direct, and it was me that got him out. And the main reason that I felt it urgent for him to leave the room, or the beautiful Christchurch auditorium, was that behind him, which he didn't know, were at least 24 dykes who did not want him there and who were going out, 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 out. So I thought, rather than bloodshed, get him out.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sandy Hall. And that is a piece of cultural history you're offering there. And
I'd just like to thank Maggie darling Maggie Eyre, because without your courage and perception of the emotional fragility of many of us and how we're so closed in from, well, it's much better now, but at the time, you know, the patriarchy was still over us like wet custard, you know, and Maggie really spearheaded the ability of many women to come forth and be our shining selves. So thank you, darling Maggie Eyre.
Sandy, this is so fortuitous that you are here too, and giving a whole dimension. And your question was so pertinent. The whole idea of what were the times. So Sandy was beginning to echo, and to my attention came with the practice I undertook to go in to do the interviews at the convention. You know, I did 20 interviews before I cut that film down to 6, with sub-processes with radio, and I had journalists, women journalists. So Sandy even mentioned that you have to have the professional closest to understanding the job from the get-go to immediately be more perceptive about need for I grew up as a country girl, so I knew that really the country was a country trying to export, you know, wool and milk. I mean, that's really what New Zealand was. Everything else was coincidental to the continuing debt crisis, and who gives a damn about art? And, you know, there was really sport, and the arts per se were fragile always.
So when you released the film, what was the reaction?
This one?
Yeah.
This one? Well, the thing in terms of the opportunity of time and place, Joe Mudaby, the old Joe Mudaby, who was a Lebanese film producer who started distributing films out of the Civic, and then his son started distributing films out of Metro, and he started his life selling roasted peanuts on Queen Street in the 50s. I went up to his back room, so I sort of felt like I'd met the royalty of the production distribution industry, and I said, could I please have the Winter Garden? I've read this film and I'd love to have a theatre. And he said, yeah, go right ahead. And so we sold out 400 seats at the first sitting, and it was a Saturday, but the box office was done there in the Civic, this little glass box, and Linda Top, she said, I'll go and sell some more. So she rushed into the office down the stairs, and there was a queue right down Queen Street. It was unique. And
who was there? I mean, was it mostly a film?
Sandy Hall was there, and
I wasn't.
And Maggie wasn't.
I was in
Maggie
New
had
York.
gone to somewhere else.
To America, to New York.
She'd gone to New York. You see, we were all doing things, Mark. And
But was it mostly women, or was it?
oh
men as
no,
well?
by then audiences needed to be everyone. That's male, female, that's the sexes. Never mind what followed after that. And everyone who wanted to go came. And let me think. Well, who were they? Well, they were Auckland people. They were Auckland people.
Gayleen's film was,
That impressed him.
it was the crisis around Gayleen's film and the movie Joe Mudaby in particular, when she had her film Mr. Wrong screened at the Civic, and Mudaby accused her of stacking the audience with her friends because there was such a roar of approval for a New Zealand film about real lives
Oh, that's
in
so
the
funny.
Civic.
Yeah, oh, look, it took a carcass of sheep to make
Yeah.
Mr. Wrong a really good film. And a Jaguar. Lots of things in Mr. Wrong. And the delight of that is hopefully Mr. Mudaby suddenly realised that he had missed out on an audience. But prior to that, perhaps. But of course, New Zealand was stuck with Hollywood films and English films pretty well. And in fact, I grew up in Hawke's Bay, and there's a movie house in Hastings, and it always took me by surprise why, when I was 15, I was driven down to a single-sex audience of Ulysses. I think it was 1965, and then I read, oh, this was given censorship in 1967 in New Zealand, and then I realised, oh, that's what distributors do. They try a film out in a town somewhere, in the suburbs, in the country, to work out how they censor it. So John, Mr. Mudaby, wouldn't have had any experience of women in film to such a dominant extent. But as I say, in my experience, I found it easy to rent the place. And of course, don't forget, Auckland's changed so much now that, you know, the metro's a jaded, sort of failed, complex area now, isn't it? So, you know, cinema's disappearing. Well, who knows? Mr. Trump might think it's disappearing already.
I think we should open it up to audience questions in a minute, but just one last question. It's interesting, between your two films, there's two very distinct methods of distribution of an artwork. Because with your first film, as you said, you did 100 screenings throughout New Zealand. You went to town halls where they had 16mm film projectors and set up there, and you also held, you had quite good conversations after the film with people there as well. I think this is actually a really fascinating model for young artists and filmmakers to consider, how an artwork reaches an audience. And then you went into this, you were probably exhausted after that
Indeed.
But then you're at the Civic, working with quite an established kind of apparatus and getting a big audience as well. So how come after all of that, it was 35 years before you made another film?
Well, your question is the apt question, which is, if you're in a country as small as this, we were 3 million people then, when you're a country as small as this, which John Barnett also said, there's no market.
Right.
So you can't, commercially you can't see that you're going to make a film for the people of your country, or a digital product for the people of your country. So I realised if you're going to work in the moving image spectrum, you must be international. So I waited 18 years until the digital sophistication increased, so that I wasn't trying to upload FTP files in 2008 and having the system crash. Before we all got anxious about spending too much money on electricity to print Bitcoin, somewhere between Bitcoin and back to 2003, people were shifting to digital. And so I realised I could have a private life, wait for the next chance for me to find an audience. It was never going to be this country. It had to be international. So I pre-sold my third film to fans.
What is fans?
A fan, F-A-N, someone who loves what I was going to make the film about.
Oh, right, I was like, film appreciators, New Zealand or something.
Film appreciators to the nth degree,
To fans.
F-A-N.
Yeah.
And so by that time I had a son who was, David and I, my husband's here tonight, this afternoon, matinee. I realised also that I had two pinnacle successes, so that there's no need to keep trying to be successful.
Yeah.
So you basically have just fun all the time, and so I went private. But waiting for digital was incredibly important. I mean, when I shot this film, it was an Arriflex, and when I shot the film before, it was a CP camera, so it was all German and American high-level news, and then next step up, negative film. But film was already becoming not what it was, and the game industry was climbing, so I shifted over to watch the game industry for my next project. And that was the key, to have 18 years, I could then make my next film, download from Steam, Valve Corporation in Seattle, and find a producer out of Cannes Film Festival who wanted to exhibit all through America. So I could have specialist distribution. It doesn't lead for an independent with a small film to any commercial success. It continues just to lead to having happy times.
Happy times. Okay, does anybody in the audience have any questions or thoughts that they would like to share?
I'm just curious, with the queues waiting to get into the theatre, were there reviews that promoted the film? How did you get that message out
Well,
there?
someone I knew who was a journalist in London when I was living there in 1973. She was aware of the film, and she wrote an in-flight essay for the Air New Zealand.
Oh, really?
I've got it. The 4 pages.
Have you got any reviews, Maggie?
I have a lot, whole box.
I don't know. I mean,
There were a lot.
to answer your question, the frank answer is there's no market. There wasn't, not then, and it's difficult always in a small country. There's no audience. You can't afford to distribute and put people up and rent rooms and or get theatres. I mean, it's just a mass minority group, this country, in terms of audience. So the reviews there must have been something in the Star.
There was Herald Star.
Something in the Herald or the Star.
You can have it. I've got a whole broadsheet of it.
Yeah, but of course that didn't mean that I was going to suddenly tour around the country. There was no legitimate opportunity for. It's only in the late 90s that cinemas would take DCP digital, and it costs minimum $10,000 to print a DCP. That's after you've edited a digital film. And then the odd small theatre might use a DVD or a MOV file, but basically you do not get into a cinema unless you spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. It's an expensive art form. All of this. the thing that's important about emphasizing